So Benji, you definitely seem like a natural-born PR machine. But since you're not representing, but actually challenging the status quo in many aspects, I'm sure there's more than meets the eye. So tell us a little about your personal background and how exactly did you end up in the dirty world of politics?
Well, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And as a quick way of introduction, my name is Benji Backer. I am the president and founder of the American Conservation Coalition. I had the opportunity to grow up in the United States as a conservative political activist. And by the time I got to college, which wasn't that long ago for me, I decided to start a conservative climate movement because, similar to probably most of you, I see climate change as a human issue rather than a polarizing, politicized issue that only one side should have a stake on. I think that this is a conversation that we all should have a stake on. And I believe that as a young movement, we can create the change that we want to see on this subject. So I live in Seattle, Washington, which if you know of it, it's the one with the big needle over there on the west coast of the United States. And I grew up in Wisconsin, where there's a lot of farming and dairy. And so I've seen two different parts of the United States, but regardless of where I've lived and where I've traveled, young people are passionate about climate change. And we feel like we've been somewhat left behind by our elders in delaying action on climate change. But yet, the solutions that we've been given haven't been up to speed for what actually can happen. We have seen every politician throughout time kind of delay, delay, delay. And in the United States, we have the Green New Deal, which is something that most Americans don't want. But yet there's no alternative, and so there's a lot of frustration in younger generations. And I took the big leap when I was in college to say, I'm just one person, but I can change this. I can help change this, and I can build a community of people who are similarly frustrated and build a movement of hope and build a movement of inspiration that just because things are dark and gloomy on climate change doesn't mean that we can't create the change that we want to see. And so over the past 5 years, what we have built is a massive organization that has reached millions of people across the United States. And in 2019, I had the opportunity to testify at the United States Congress with Greta Thunberg. I was the conservative witness at Congress, and she was the liberal witness. But it shows that this is a generational conversation that each one of us have a stake in. And what I'm hoping to talk about today is how each one of you, we're not all that different. We're probably similar ages, and we grew up in different parts of the world, but how our generation can take this issue, run with it, and build a movement of hope and inspiration across cultures, across ideologies, and make climate change a priority that we can all believe in.
Well, it sounds very smooth, but you did. And you mentioned Greta Thunberg, and I would like to continue on that point, because from Al Gore to her herself, ever since climate change was a major issue in the public agenda, it was always the territory of the left. First the Green parties in the 1990s, then the major center-left parties, liberals, social democrats, as well. Until very recently, it seemed like impossible to change that because of some cultural reasons even. And I think for many in the audience, it still seems simply unchangeable. So how, please let's convince us that it's not.
Yeah, I don't think that it's unchangeable. And where I think Greta gets it wrong and Al Gore gets it wrong is that when you hear from them about this topic, it comes across as very negative and hopeless and fear-based. But throughout history, the greatest movements that were ever created came from hope rather than fear and inspiration of a better world to create from the generation that wanted to create that change. And we can do the same thing again on climate. And in the United States, what we've really seen work, and I think can work across the globe, is this idea that innovation and technology can solve tough problems, that people in their local areas know how to handle environmental protection better than somebody thousands of miles away. People in Hungary know how to take care of the Hungarian environment better than the United Nations agreement knows how to take care of Hungary. And if we can empower people in their local communities to take leadership and be proud of that and have technology and really incentivize a roadmap to the future, that's, I think, where we need to go on climate. And that is something that you can take tangible steps on. And as young people, I think we've been too quick to say, we need to solve climate change right now. And instead, we should be saying, let's take steps, large, tangible steps to solving a problem. Because it doesn't happen overnight, especially when climate change is a global challenge that we all face. Everyone has a role, and we can't do something that quickly. We can't change the course of history overnight, but we can take tangible, hopeful steps. And if we do that individually in our own lives and empower our communities to do that, we can actually make a difference. And the United States, we've been able to pass policies at the state level and at the federal level. So, in Washington State and in Washington, D.C., not to be confused with each other. Us Americans, we can be kind of confusing. We have like the same word for everything. But we, in Washington, have been able to create a massive amount of change because unlike the movement that Greta Thunberg created, which has been very helpful overall in driving young people to action, we also have taken a different stance that each one of us plays an important role and that we can implement policies that really move the ball forward.
Yeah, we will discuss policy, but before that, let's talk a little bit about climate skeptics. So when you meet people who are questioning climate change as an existential threat inside your own political community, how you handle them? So how you handle those people who debate the weight of this issue in your own political tribe? What is your evangelizing strategy?
Yeah. Well, in this room, how many of you believe, by a show of hands, how many of you believe climate change is real and something we need to do something about? Also raise your hands if you've met someone who is probably older, who does not believe climate change is something we should be doing something about. So each one of you has the same problem that this question addresses. The first thing that you have to mentally think about is that there is a generational gap between old people and young people on climate change. And we've grown up in a time where we know what the science is saying. We're surrounded by it all the time. We all know who Al Gore is and Greta, and we all know about the IPCC report, and we know about these things because we've grown up in a time where that's been the case. Older generations didn't. And for a while, no one even knew that producing energy was going to have a harm on our air. And now we do know that. And I think what's important when you're talking to older generations is, in skeptics, is to understand why they're skeptical, but then provide an answer that is appealing to them, that goes along with their values. You know, when you talk about climate change, a lot of old people are skeptical because they feel like the solutions are against their values. And if we can provide solutions that say, you want clean air, you want clean water, I do too. And we can do that through technology and job creation, and Hungary's economy can grow, and all these solutions can be good for us, and have that, again, hopeful approach. That's appealing to older generations. And your grandparents, my grandparents, want to leave this planet better than they found it. And when you create a culture of environmentalism that is about bringing people a better planet and cleaning up our environment rather than making about all the divisive politics, then you can start building those bridges in a really positive way.
I think we arrived to the question, who pays the price, which is the ultimate question, I think, for those who are not climate skeptics, but skeptical about the global agenda of climate policy. So after discussing this cultural part, we are now approaching the depth of the issue, which is the actual content of a proper climate policy. Please explain us how your solutions actually differ from the traditional leftist climate policy, and what are the most important differences that you, let's say, as the president of the US would do on the day one?
Sure. Well, thankfully, I'm not the president of the United States. That's a very tough job. It seems like everything that the president does is criticized by somebody. So I'm glad that we can be a youth movement where I don't have to be the president. But one thing that I really want to make clear about this is that for a while in the United States, and I know this has been true here as well, conservatives were not involved in the climate change conversation at all. And my belief as a conservative who deeply loves nature and deeply loves the environment and cares about climate change is that if you're not in a conversation, you're losing. And that can be true with conservatives and climate change, but it also can be true with young people and politics in general, and young people and climate change as well. If we're not active in those conversations and we're not lending our voice, we're losing. Because when we put our voice in the conversation, it's guided in a direction that it otherwise wouldn't be. And I think as conservatives in the United States on climate change, or as young people, it's the same thing where we're too scared to engage on something that is so big and massive that we just kind of move away from it. And having to come up with your own solutions, which I'll talk about in a second, can be very scary as well. But that's more reason to jump in. That's more reason to say, you know what, maybe I'm not supposed to be here, but my ideas are worthwhile. And they're going to be different. They're going to challenge the status quo of what's been presented so far. But it's needed. My voice is needed. And each one of us brings such an important voice to the table because we all have different backgrounds. We've all grown up in different families and different cultures and in different parts of society. We all have a different viewpoint on life, but we're all humans who have a really important approach to showcase. And for me, I think that approach, and something that has galvanized a lot of support in the United States that is different from the left, is a few key pillars. One is innovation. The science around climate change says that we don't have all the solutions to solving climate change yet. We don't have all the technology, and we don't have all of the economic opportunities there yet. If you are a country like India or China, and you are developing, it's no secret that they're not going to plant solar panels all over their country that cost more and are more unreliable. So what's the solution to that? Creating technology that allows cleaner energy sources to be more cost-effective and more reliable.
Is there anyone from the left who debate this pillar, innovation?
Yeah. In the United States, I mean, we have people saying solar and wind 100% by 2030. So, you know, in the United States, there are people who are saying no natural gas, no coal, no nuclear, nothing other than solar and wind by 2030. And that's really popular because it sounds really good, right? It sounds really clean, and it sounds, I don't know, it just sounds positive, but it's not realistic. And so every time that you're talking about that, you're actually not talking about something that is real. And for me, and for our movement, what we realize is that we need more technology and innovation to boost the clean energy sources. And no one in the United States, on the left at least, is talking about that. And that's a big problem. So that's something that differentiates us from them in that approach. The second is, if you go back to the second pillar, if you go back to your science class in elementary school, we learn about how trees suck up carbon out of the atmosphere. And our second pillar that the left also doesn't really talk about in the United States is we should be planting more trees and restoring more of our natural areas and protecting the coral reefs and the other natural ecosystems that suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Because it's easy, it's not divisive, and we know it works.
But it sounds like a consensus.
Again, in the United States, it's not. Okay. And that's what's fascinating about this conversation, at least, and I don't know exactly all the details about how it's worked here, but in the United States, people are really trying to focus on 100% wind and solar only. And that's pretty much everything that the left is talking about. And this Green New Deal, which is kind of their platform, is, I don't know what this is in Hungarian currency, but it's going to cost us close to $100 trillion. And there's no actual plan of how to implement that strategy. And it puts the United States at a disadvantage. And that brings me to the third pillar, which is every country should be doing what's best for them when it comes to fighting climate change. Because in specific countries, there are different solutions. Hungary is going to have a different solution to climate change than China or India or the United States, because the landscape is different and the energy sources are different. And
so that means you would destroy the global agreements like the Kyoto Agreement or the Paris Accord because of their global nature?
I think what's important about the international agreements is everyone should be at that table. All the countries should be at the table talking about what types of solutions they're working on, instead of all signing up for the same thing. Because if you're signing an agreement saying you're going to do the same thing in the same way, how do you expect countries that can't do the same thing in the same way to actually follow through? Does that mean they shouldn't be communicating with each other or sharing ideas or maybe sharing some end goals? They should absolutely be doing those things. But trying to say that we can all have the same solutions across borders is just not true.
So what about the fourth pillar?
The fourth pillar is infrastructure. In the United States, what infrastructure is we have, right now we have a lot of electric vehicles, and that industry is taking off in the United States, and we have charging stations everywhere. I took an electric car, a Tesla, for 50 days and hit 34 states without a problem in an electric car, completely 100% all electric. But to combat climate change, you have to improve the way we build roads and bridges and charging stations for cars and all the things that it takes to make a society work. Those are going to be upgraded if you fight climate change. And climate change, especially on the coasts with sea level rise and all the problems that exist there, you have to prepare for those sorts of disasters. And that will also be upgrading infrastructure to make sure that we are ready for when climate change strikes.
I think you still missed one of the most important issues, which is nuclear. What is the conservative stand on nuclear?
Well, I also want to get a taste of the room on this. How many of you think nuclear is an important solution to climate change? How many of you don't? All right, so that's, I mean,
seems like a very
significant
realist audience.
Yeah. So for those who are skeptical, and for those of you who know people who are skeptical, hopefully this is helpful. We cannot solve climate change without nuclear energy, at least at this point. Here in Hungary, it's a perfect example of how powerful nuclear can be. Half of the country's energy comes from nuclear, and there's only one plant, and it's an older plant. A solar panel or a wind turbine, as awesome as they are, have such limited scope because the wind has to be blowing and the sun has to be shining, and the energy at this point can't be stored anywhere. Nuclear can power entire countries, entire communities, and it can do it in a very, very cost-effective way that powers everyone's homes at a price that they can pay. Nuclear is clean, it is safe, and it's reliable. And even though we've had nuclear disasters throughout history, those were when the technology and the oversight from governments was not good. Today, you have the biggest companies in the world investing in nuclear because they know that if they want to fight climate change and decarbonize, nuclear is the only way to go. And so all of us, all the countries and the communities that can have nuclear power need to push for more nuclear power because despite what a lot of the critics say, it is the cleanest, it's the most reliable, and it's actually the safest source of energy out there. Of course, technology could change, but at this point, it's really the only path forward.
So let's close this, Benji, by coming back personal. Here we have hundreds of people, mostly from your age, aspiring to have some footprint on things, some chance to change things for the better. What is your single most important advice to him when it comes to self-management and self-promotion and having an impact?
Well, I'm going to do two instead of one. The first is you are never too young to make a difference. And as young people, we're always told, sit and wait your turn, right? The old people have got this. You'll figure it out, and in 20 years, you'll be able to make these decisions. To that, say no. We bring a new mindset and a new set of values that is so important, and we bring a passion that is unparalleled. And I'm sitting here, I'm 23, I could be younger than many of you. That's because I just kept pushing up against that and saying, no, I'm going to keep fighting for what I believe in. And you can never be too young to do that and to start your own business or start your own NGO or run for a political office or whatever you want to do to make an impact. Age is just a number when it comes to those sorts of things. The second thing is be patient. These things take time. And
sounds controversial.
It's very controversial in Gen Z because Generation Z, we want that quick fix, right?
But your first and your second point seems like in conflict.
Well, to the first one, you got to jump in, and you have to lean into making a difference in whatever way you want to. But that doesn't mean that that won't take time to make that change. And every day is an opportunity to make an impact more so than the previous. And over 4 years, we've built a conservative climate empire in the United States. And 4 years in the scope of the world is a very short amount of time. But when you're going through it, it feels so long because it just feels like things aren't changing and there's failure after failure after failure. But the more that we stuck with it, the more success we had. So we not only push back against, oh, we're too young to make a difference in our late teens and early 20s, but we also were patient along with that process. And I think if I can just give one piece of advice, it would be to lean in and be patient because your voice is needed and your work will not go unnoticed.
Thank you, Benji.
Awesome. Thank you so much.